For more than 20 years, America believed it knew this story. We believed we knew the husband. We believed we knew the motive. We believed we knew the truth. Christmas Eve, 2002. A pregnant young woman disappears. Her husband claims he went fishing. Months later, her body is found in the same bay where he said he cast his line. He had a secret mistress. He lied. He smiled at a vigil. He acted strangely. So we decided together, Scott Peterson is guilty. And that was the end of it. Or so we thought. Because now, decades later, something extraordinary is happening. A group of elite attorneys from the Los Angeles Innocence Project, the organization that has helped free over 240 wrongfully convicted people across America, has entered the case. And they claim the world missed something. Something big. They claim critical evidence was never tested. Key witnesses were ignored, and explosive leads were buried beneath the weight of public rage. They claim investigators locked on Scott immediately and never looked anywhere else. They claim some of the evidence was mishandled, and some may have been destroyed. They claim witnesses saw Laci alive after Scott left the house. And now, a judge has ordered new DNA testing on a piece of evidence found on Laci's body that has never been fully tested, not even in the original trial. For the first time since 2004, the ground beneath this case is shaking. And we are forced to ask a question no one ever expected to ask. What if Scott Peterson really didn't do it? Because here is the uncomfortable truth. A man can look guilty, act guilty, lie like he's guilty, and still not be guilty of murder. Tonight, we open the case back up. We dig through every detail. We expose the cracks. We dissect the motive. We unravel the psychology. We examine the evidence. We follow the new leads. We confront the uncomfortable reality that justice might not be as certain as we once believed. Because sometimes the story we accept is not the story the evidence tells. This is Scott Peterson. Could he be innocent? The new evidence explained. Before the cameras, before the protests outside the courthouse, before the headlines labeled him a monster, before America made up its mind, there was simply a missing woman, a pregnant wife, a young mother-to-be, and a family waiting for Christmas Eve to begin. It's hard to imagine now, because this case is cemented in history as one of the darkest stories in modern America. But in those first hours, there was no villain. There was only fear. December 24th, 2002. A chilly but ordinary morning in Modesto, California. Families wrapping gifts, neighbors stringing lights, parents preparing dinner plans, children counting the hours until morning. Inside the Peterson home, 27-year-old Laci Peterson was alive, glowing, excited for her first child. She was only weeks away from giving birth. Her son already had a name. Connor. She had a future, waiting. And sometime between morning and midday, that future vanished. At 5:17 p.m., police received the missing person report. And instantly, without warning, this wasn't a private family emergency anymore. It became a nationwide crisis. The search began with neighbors on foot, then volunteers, then police, then detectives, then helicopters, then the national media. In a matter of hours, Modesto was transformed into the epicenter of hope, fear, and speculation. Laci's face appeared everywhere. Television screens, newspapers, store windows, flyers, billboards, gas stations. America united behind her image. Her smile became a symbol of innocence, of motherhood, of tragedy. Her disappearance became the missing person story of the decade. And almost immediately, eyes turned toward one person. Not because police announced it, not because evidence pointed to it, but because the public instinctively looked where they always look first. The husband, Scott Peterson, the quiet fertilizer salesman with a calm voice, smooth demeanor, and seemingly emotionless presence. And from the moment he appeared on camera, America did not like him. Something felt wrong. He was too composed, too steady, too controlled. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. While the search for Laci grew desperate and emotional, Scott appeared almost unaffected. And slowly, the collective belief formed. Something is off with this man. That was the spark. And from that spark, a fire ignited. This wasn't just a missing person search anymore. It became a national obsession, a story people couldn't stop watching. And by January, that obsession turned into something else entirely. Because the world learned Scott Peterson had a secret. Her name was Amber Frey. And suddenly, the narrative changed from tragedy to betrayal, from sympathy to suspicion, from concern to fury. The media swarmed, talk shows erupted, reporters camped outside his home. Neighbors screamed at him, strangers cursed him. America didn't just want answers. They wanted justice. They wanted a villain, and Scott Peterson, whether guilty or innocent, fit the role perfectly. He was calm when he should have been panicked, smiling when he should have been grieving, dating another woman while his pregnant wife was missing. And to millions watching, that was all the proof they needed. By spring of 2003, this was no longer a mystery. This was a narrative. Scott Peterson wasn't just accused. He was condemned. Long before the trial, long before the forensic reports, long before the evidence was examined, the world decided what he was. They decided who he was. They decided what he did. The verdict was delivered by the public before the courtroom ever opened. 2 decades later, that reaction still echoes. Because the Scott Peterson case wasn't just a police investigation. It was a cultural event, a psychological event, an emotional event. It revealed how quickly society can decide guilt based on fear, based on anger, based on betrayal, based on behavior, based on optics, and not necessarily based on facts. And that is why this story still haunts the world, because for 20 years, we all believed we knew the truth. We believed the story was simple. We believed the narrative was airtight. We believed the right man was behind bars. We believed justice was served. But now, those beliefs are being challenged, not by tabloids, not by conspiracy theorists, not by internet detectives, but by the most respected wrongful conviction organization in the country. If they are right, if even some of what they uncovered is true, then we may be looking at something unthinkable. Not just a murdered mother, but a broken justice system. Not just tragedy, but catastrophe. And this is where the story truly begins. Because to understand whether Scott Peterson could be innocent, you must first understand the world that already decided he was guilty. For most of America, the Scott Peterson case begins the same way, with the disappearance. But the investigation didn't unfold like a mystery. It unfolded like a conclusion waiting to be proven. From the very first hours, police and the media didn't just search for Laci. They searched for why Scott did it. Because on paper, the situation seemed painfully obvious. A pregnant woman vanishes. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. No blood. No ransom. No witnesses. No enemy. No threat. No warning. When investigators looked around the neighborhood, everything was normal. The only unusual thing was Scott. And so, the story solidified. The timeline became gospel. The narrative became official. The prosecution's theory took shape. And America was told, step by step, exactly what happened, with confidence and certainty. Let's walk through it. Slowly. Deliberately. As the world understood it in 2002 and 2003. Christmas Eve morning. According to the police timeline, Scott and Laci woke up together, had breakfast, made plans. Around 9:30 a.m., Scott left home to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina, a detail that would define the rest of his life. Prosecutors later argued this wasn't a fishing trip. It was a body disposal mission, and when Scott drove away, they say Laci was already dead. The state claimed Scott murdered her in the home sometime between 8:30 and 9:30 a.m., then wrapped her body, loaded it quietly into his truck, and drove her to the bay. They argued he launched the boat, weighted her down, and dropped her into the frigid water just miles northwest of the marina. According to the state, that was the crime. Simple. Calculated. Chilling. The dog. Around 10:30 a.m., a neighbor found the Petersons' golden retriever wandering alone. Leash still attached. Mud on the paws. Door closed. This discovery became symbolic. To investigators, to reporters, to the public, the dog was confirmation. Laci did not walk away. She never left the house. She never took the dog for a stroll. The prosecution insisted Scott killed Laci before that leash was ever clipped on. And that detail was repeated by media outlets so many times, so confidently, that people accepted it as fact. The search begins. By that evening, the streets surrounding Covina Avenue were filled with patrol cars, officers knocking on doors, neighbors gathering under streetlights, and family desperately calling anyone who would answer. Investigation didn't start slow. It exploded. Within 48 hours, Modesto police, FBI agents, volunteers, news crews, and national networks swarmed the city. Because this wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was tragedy. Tragedy sells. The bodies 4 months later, April 13th, 2003, a couple walking near Point Isabel shoreline discovered the remains of a tiny male fetus with umbilical cord still attached. Investigators named the child Connor. The next day, April 14th, the partial remains of an adult female washed ashore less than a mile away. Badly decomposed, unrecognizable, swept and damaged by ocean movement. And when DNA confirmed the identity, the nation froze. It was Laci, the pregnant mother America prayed for, was gone. Location, location, location. Then came the detail that cemented the narrative permanently. The bodies surfaced in the exact same bay Scott Peterson claimed he was fishing in. On the morning Laci disappeared, the same bay, the same hours, the same location. And in the eyes of millions, this was no longer coincidence. This was destiny. This was guilt. This was the story writing itself, the affair. Then Amber Frey entered the public consciousness, and with her, the final nail in the coffin. America didn't learn about the affair quietly. It detonated. Amber sat down with police investigators. She cooperated. She recorded Scott. She exposed lie after lie. And suddenly, the case wasn't just about a missing woman. It was about a husband living a double life. It was about deception, manipulation, selfishness, and betrayal. People didn't see evidence. They saw motive. Not just a motive to cheat, a motive to escape, a motive to start a new life with a new woman, and no responsibilities. The psychology felt obvious. The puzzle fit irresistible. Trial of the century. The courtroom wasn't just packed. It was suffocating. It was history. It was theater. It was anger. Amber Frey testified. Scott lied on recordings. The timeline matched. The bodies matched. The behavior matched. The emotionless interviews matched. The vigil smile matched. The public looked at him and saw the worst husband imaginable. And that became enough. Even without blood evidence, DNA evidence, a murder weapon, a cause of death, a location of death, confessions. He was convicted and sentenced to death for 20 years. That version of the story remained immovable, unquestionable, untouchable, until now. Powerful voices are stepping forward to say, wait, something was missed. And suddenly, the investigation we thought was perfect looks imperfect, incomplete, flawed. Because now we know, while the entire country was watching Scott, the investigation may have missed something enormous. And if that is true, then everything we thought we understood about this case may be wrong. For nearly 2 decades, the Scott Peterson case lived in a kind of emotional cement, frozen, unchangeable, undeniable. The story was finished. The verdict was permanent. The guilt was absolute. Or so the world believed. Because suddenly, almost out of nowhere, the case erupted back into the public consciousness, with a revelation no one expected. Not a rumor, not a YouTube theory, not a tabloid fantasy, but a formal legal challenge, filed by a world-class innocence organization, the Los Angeles Innocence Project. An organization whose entire mission is not to defend criminals, but to identify wrongful convictions. An organization that only takes cases when they believe justice may have failed. When they entered the Scott Peterson case, the ground beneath this story shifted. Because for the first time, someone credible was saying, something doesn't add up. And their claims weren't minor. The Innocence Project filed a document, over 400 pages long, meticulously detailing evidence they believe was ignored, suppressed, dismissed, or never examined properly. The petition didn't ask to retry the case emotionally. It asked to re-examine it scientifically, with new technology, with new eyes, with new standards. Let's break down the 3 most shocking pillars of their argument. Slowly, carefully, one at a time, because each one changes the story in a massive way. Claim number 1, Laci was alive after Scott left. For 20 years, the prosecution timeline was considered airtight. They said Scott killed Laci early in the morning, long before 10 a.m. They claimed it with certainty. They insisted it was the only possible explanation. But the Innocence Project petition counters that narrative with something stunning. Multiple witnesses say they saw a pregnant woman walking a golden retriever in the neighborhood after Scott left home. Some gave precise time estimates: 10:30 a.m., 10:45 a.m., 11 a.m. Descriptions matched. Pregnant, brown curly hair, walking a golden retriever. Near Scott's neighborhood, one witness claimed she watched the woman struggling with the dog as it sniffed around a hedge. Another recalled seeing the woman at an intersection just blocks from the home. Another says she saw the dog pulling on the leash violently. And none of these witnesses match Scott's timeline. If those sightings are accurate, Laci Peterson was alive, not when Scott returned home, but long after he left. This would shatter the prosecution's theory. It would demolish the state's timeline. It would destroy the central pillar holding the conviction together: that Scott killed her before he left for the marina. Because how can that be true if she was alive on the sidewalk hours later? But the prosecution countered this years ago. Eyewitnesses can be wrong. Eyewitnesses can be influenced. Eyewitnesses can confuse dates. They claimed the sightings were unreliable because none were documented on the first day. True. But here is the counter-argument. Most wrongful convictions contain eyewitnesses who were ignored, only to later be proven right. And the Innocence Project knows this. They've seen it repeatedly. Many of the 240-plus exonerations nationwide were overturned because eyewitnesses were dismissed. Now, their position is clear. If the witnesses were right, Scott could not have been the killer. This is the first fracture, but not the last. Claim number 2, the burglary across the street. This is where the story shifts from unlikely coincidence to disturbing possibility. 2 days after Laci vanished, a burglary occurred across the street from the Peterson home. A safe was stolen. Items were taken. The suspects were identified and arrested later. But here's the detail that set off alarm bells. According to the Innocence Project petition, a witness claims a burglar admitted he saw Laci alive that morning, walking the dog, and panicked. She might have seen them in the act. This theory is terrifying in its simplicity. An unexpected witness, a panicked criminal, a confrontation, a tragedy. According to the petition, police didn't follow this lead properly. They dismissed it because by then they had tunnel vision. Their target was Scott, and everything else was static. But here's where it gets worse. Because then, Scott wasn't disposing of a body. He was actually fishing, and everything changes. Everything. But skeptics are quick to argue. The burglary was 2 days later, not the same morning, which is true. On paper, were confronted by a pregnant woman. Happens. Then questions were set in. And what would they do next? The Innocence Project believes those questions were never seriously examined. Not then. Not in court. Not in appeals. Claim number 3. Evidence was destroyed. This is the moment the petition escalates from concerning to shocking. According to the filing, there are items that were never tested, never examined, never preserved, or destroyed entirely. And we are not talking about trivial objects. We are talking about potentially blood-related items, vehicle-related items, biological material, clothing fibers, hair, tarp samples, and evidence tied to the burned-out van. Items that could have been tested, should have been tested, but weren't, in a death penalty case. Let that sink in. critical physical evidence never examined before sentencing a man to die. Whether you believe Scott is innocent or guilty, that should disturb you. Because evidence matters, especially in cases where lives end, especially in cases where execution is on the table. And here's the twist. Some of this evidence may have been destroyed before the defense ever saw it, meaning the jury never had the complete picture. The defense never had the full opportunity. The truth, whatever it is, may be hiding in evidence that no longer exists, and the public never knew until now. The question that emerges: if the prosecution was correct, why ignore witnesses? Why overlook a burglary? Why lose evidence? Why not test physical material? Why not test tape found on the body? Why destroy anything? Why rush to the finish line? Why close the case emotionally before closing it scientifically? The Innocence Project is not claiming Scott is innocent. They are claiming something else. We do not know what happened. And that is far more unsettling. Because doubt does not exonerate. Doubt destabilizes. Doubt fractures what we thought was solid. And it forces us to confront one terrifying possibility. What if the truth was never discovered? Because investigators stopped looking for it. For years, the Peterson case lived in a strange contradiction. The state insisted the evidence was overwhelming. Yet somehow, critical items were never tested. Not once, not ever. And that contradiction became the spark that reignited this entire case. Because in 2024, for the first time in 2 decades, a judge agreed with the defense on one extraordinary point. Something must be tested, something physical, something found on Laci's body, something untouched in a death penalty trial. A single piece of duct tape, not a random piece of tape, not stray debris, but a section of adhesive tape recovered directly from Laci's clothing, wrapped around fabric found on her remains, untested until now. The courtroom moment that changed everything. October 2024, inside a California courtroom. Lawyers for the Los Angeles Innocence Project stood before a judge and argued a simple, devastating point. If untested evidence exists, we cannot claim certainty. Not moral certainty, not scientific certainty, not legal certainty, not in a case where a man was sentenced to death. It was a stunning argument, not because it was complicated, but because it was obvious. How could a jury speak with finality when DNA had never spoken at all? The judge's ruling. Then came the shock. The judge ordered DNA testing on the 15.5-inch tape segment. Just one item, but that single decision cracked the case in half, because the judge had to admit the unthinkable. Evidence remained untested. Evidence remained unexamined. Evidence remained unresolved. Evidence could still speak. And when lawyers and reporters heard the tape described in court, 4 words sent chills through. Observers. Never previously DNA tested. People couldn't believe it. Tape. On the clothing. Of a decomposed abducted victim. Untested. For 22 years, in a death penalty case. It felt impossible. And yet, it was true. What the DNA could reveal. This is where the story becomes terrifying. Because DNA technology has advanced. Sharply. Radically. Life-changingly. Compared to 2003. Today's forensic tools can extract dead skin cells, fingerprint sweat, saliva transfer, microscopic epithelial cells, microabrasion residue, trace contact DNA, invisible biological shedding, from adhesive. Meaning, if anyone else handled that tape, even briefly, even wearing gloves, even without bleeding, modern analysis could detect it. And if the DNA profile isn't Scott, if it matches someone with a criminal history, someone tied to the burglary, someone in DNA databases, someone completely unknown, this case explodes. Immediately, instantly, irreversibly. The evidence blocked. But now comes the darker side. The Innocence Project did not request testing on just one item. They requested testing on 14, including hair clutched in Laci's hand, rope fibers, additional duct tape samples, more DNA evidence, and further investigation, biological material from autopsy, materials recovered from the burglary scene, plastic secondary wrapping, vegetation samples, material collected during marine recovery. But the judge denied testing on those 13 items. Denied. Rejected. On now. Not approved. Not permitted. Why? Because, legally, testing cannot be granted simply out of curiosity. There must be compelling grounds that the test would likely prove innocence, and the court determined not all items met the threshold. So only the tape will be tested. For now. The reality of the war. This isn't simply a debate about evidence. This is a legal and psychological battlefield. One side argues there was overwhelming evidence. Testing is unnecessary. The system worked. The other side argues there is untested material. There are unanswered questions, and someone could be innocent. This isn't just medicine, it's surgery. On the justice system itself. Because if one case this famous can contain massive blind spots, how many others do? How many verdicts sit on unstable ground? How many simply because evidence was never examined? With modern tools, and how many families, on both sides, victim and accused, now live inside questions that justice was supposed to answer? The clock is ticking. The DNA analysis is active. It can take weeks, months, or longer. If the DNA matches Scott, the state strengthens. If it matches someone else, everything detonates. If it shows contamination, chaos ensues. Until the results arrive, the case lives in a terrifying limbo, where Scott Peterson sits in prison, not condemned fully, not cleared fully, but suspended somewhere in between. And the rest of us must wait in uncertainty, because innocence isn't proven yet, but neither is guilt. Not completely, and justice cannot rest comfortably in the space between. Even without forensic proof, even before the autopsy, even before the trial began, America had already decided Scott Peterson was guilty. Not because of evidence, but because of behavior. Because we watched him, we studied him, we listened to him, we searched for humanity and found silence. And that silence made him the perfect villain. Because behavior is emotional evidence. And sometimes emotional evidence is louder than fact. The affair, the betrayal that destroyed him. When the world learned Scott was having an affair, while Laci was pregnant, the story shifted from tragedy to betrayal. Suddenly, he wasn't just a husband searching for his missing wife. He was a liar, a cheater, a deceiver. Amber Frey became the bombshell. Not because adultery proves murder, but because adultery destroys sympathy. And sympathy is what? Protects people from suspicion. When Amber revealed Scott told her his wife had died, weeks before Laci vanished, the public felt physically sick. How could a husband tell another woman that his wife was dead while she was alive, while she was decorating for Christmas, while she was naming their child? It was unconscionable, disgusting, unforgivable. To many, it wasn't just incriminating. It was prophetic, as if he willed her death through words before it ever happened. But here is the psychological catch. Cheating does not equal murder. It equals selfishness, cowardice, deception. And all three can exist without violence. This is where the case becomes dangerous emotionally. Because Scott's affair didn't prove he killed Laci. It proved he was capable of lying to everyone. And once the world sees a liar, it never sees innocence again. The fishing trip, the story no one believed. The fishing trip became a symbol of absurdity, a symbol of suspicion, a symbol of deception. On Christmas Eve, in freezing weather, alone, without excitement, in a small boat no one knew he had, on the day his wife vanished, investigators didn't believe it. Reporters didn't believe it. The public didn't believe it. Because it didn't sound like grief. It didn't sound like panic. It didn't sound like a normal reaction to a missing wife. It sounded like pretext. It sounded like cover. It sounded like a script. And when police discovered, Scott couldn't even explain what he was trying to catch. With wrong bait, wrong gear, wrong season, the story collapsed emotionally. Even if he was telling the truth, it sounded like a lie. The vigil. The smile that haunted America. When the vigil was held for Laci, the world watched Scott's face, and they didn't see heartbreak. They saw calm, neutral, flat. They saw a man who didn't look devastated. They saw a man who smiled at a prayer vigil for his missing pregnant wife. That footage aired everywhere, and the public made a unanimous judgment. No innocent man smiles like that. But psychologists point out something chilling. Some people smile when overwhelmed by trauma. Some laugh when in shock. Some shut down emotionally when reality becomes unbearable. It is a condition called inappropriate affect, a human glitch, a broken emotional response under pressure, which means that smile could have been guilt, or grief, or shock, or dissociation, and we still don't know which. The lies, the pattern that damaged everything. This is where Scott's behavior truly condemned him. He lied, constantly, and badly. He lied to Amber. He lied to police. He lied to Laci's family. He lied to reporters. He lied about trips. He lied about calls. He lied about details that didn't even matter. This wasn't strategic lying. It was compulsive lying. And compulsive lying creates an emotional truth. If he lies about small things, he must be lying about everything. This is how the public thinks. This is how juries think. This is how prosecutors win. The running theory, the Mexico fear. When Scott was arrested, he wasn't at home. He wasn't surrounded by family. He wasn't grieving. He was in San Diego, near the Mexico border. With $15,000 in cash, his brother's ID, camping gear, a new car, and a bleached, blonde disguise. That image became permanent. Whether innocent or guilty, it looked like escape. And escape looks like guilt, even if it isn't. The psychology of appearance. Here is the core truth investigators understand. Guilty behavior and guilty appearance are not the same thing. Some guilty people look innocent. Some innocent people look guilty. Scott Peterson looked guilty, deeply, profoundly, irreversibly. But appearance is performance. Behavior is interpretation. Neither is evidence. And yet, they convicted him emotionally, long before they convicted him legally. Because before the DNA, before the evidence, before the trial, the world had already seen enough. They believed the story. They believed the motive. They believed the narrative. Because Scott Peterson violated something sacred. Expectation. The expectation that a grieving husband breaks, falls apart, begs for help, shows emotion, shows agony, shows desperation. But Scott didn't, and for that, the world condemned him. But one question remains, the most disturbing question of all. Can a guilty-looking man be innocent? For 20 years, we were told the evidence was overwhelming, that the forensics sealed Scott Peterson's fate, that science proved what emotions suspected. But when you strip away the headlines, the emotions, and the assumptions, something startling emerges. There was no forensic smoking gun, no blood trail, no crime scene, no physical connection between Scott and the act of murder itself. In fact, the forensic foundation of this case is far thinner than most people remember. Tonight, we reopen that evidence, piece by piece, not to defend Scott, but to ask the question we never asked in 2004. What do we actually know? And what did we only think we knew? The house. No signs of violence. Police searched the Peterson home. Thoroughly. Repetitively. Scientifically. They used luminol. They used forensic light. Sources. They searched floorboards, furniture, sleeping areas, bathroom fixtures, tile, fabric, carpeting, and they found nothing. No blood, no spatter, no transfer, no cleanup traces, no signs of struggle, no indication that a violent killing occurred in that home. None. And yet, the state argued Scott killed Laci inside. Quietly, cleanly, surgically, with no mess, with no noise, with no trace left behind. Possible? Yes. Likely? That is another question entirely. The body. No cause of death. This is the most shocking forensic reality of the case. No medical examiner ever determined how Laci Peterson died. Not strangulation. Not stabbing. Not gunshot. Not suffocation. Not drowning. There was no physical proof of how her life ended. Not in the autopsy, not in the photos, not in the reports. Because the ocean destroyed the primary evidence. There was no physical proof of how her life ended. Not in the autopsy, not in the photos, not in the reports. Because the ocean destroyed the primary evidence. Bones were missing. Soft tissue was gone. Vital forensic clues were erased. Which means the state had to build a murder narrative without medical proof of murder. The baby, the impossibility of timing. The forensic controversy deepens dramatically when Connor enters the discussion. Because for years, People assumed Connor died when his mother did. But forensic pathologists have debated this timeline aggressively. Some experts argue Connor may have lived longer, possibly into January, possibly into February, based on measurements, based on bone growth estimates, based on decomposition patterns. If Connor lived past December 24th, Scott's timeline collapses entirely. But because the ocean altered the remains, that question was never answerable, and yet it remains open, unresolved. Every expert agrees. We do not know when Connor died, not scientifically, not definitively, not even approximately. The Bay, the biggest forensic paradox. This is the detail prosecutors leaned on. Scott fished in the Bay. Laci was found in the Bay. Therefore, Scott must have killed her. But forensic logic asks something different. If Scott placed her in the water, where is the forensic connection? Where is the trace evidence? Where is the marine transfer? Marine vegetation, sand, salt trace, microscopic particulates. Where is the proof the body was transported in his truck, or his boat, or on his equipment? Where are the fibers? The hairs? The particles? Nowhere. Because none were found. Not on Scott. Not in his boat. Not on his clothes. Not on his warehouse. Not anywhere. Nothing connected Scott physically to a body going into that bay. Not one forensic link. The anchors, the concrete theory. The prosecution insisted that Scott made anchors. Concrete anchors. In his warehouse. To weigh Laci down. It sounded convincing, emotionally. But scientifically, none were ever found. Not in the warehouse. Not on the boat. Not in the bay. Not on the bodies. Not on the ocean floor. Not anywhere. The theory depended on anchors that never existed, evidence that was never located, objects that never materialized in any form. The tarp, the forensic void. The tarp in Scott's truck looked suspicious. Cadaver dogs alerted at one point. But cadaver dog alerts are not evidence. They are clues. Clues that require follow-up testing. Testing that never happened, not once, in a death penalty case. And then, years later, the tarp vanished. Lost, misplaced, unavailable for modern analysis. A potential forensic key. Gone, forever. The burned van, the ghost scene. On December 26th, police reported a burned-out van in Modesto. Tarps inside, rope inside, a mattress inside, near where witnesses reported suspicious activity. Some believe this van could have contained evidence, or the body, or evidence of transport. But today, the van is gone, destroyed, removed, unusable. No modern analysis, no DNA extraction, no trace testing. Entirely erased from history. And yet, no one seems to know why. The DNA failure. This is what terrifies forensic experts. Not only was some evidence never tested, but some evidence was lost, and some may have been destroyed. That is not normal, not acceptable, not forgivable in a death penalty trial. Because certainty demands proof. Not assumptions, not emotion, not optics, not coincidence. Proof. And when you remove the emotion, the outrage, the betrayal, and the affair, a chilling forensic picture emerges. There is no physical evidence that Scott Peterson killed his wife. None. Zero. Not a fingerprint, not a trace, not a stain, not a fiber, not a hair, No cause of death. No murder scene. No weapon. No physical link. Only behavior. Only coincidence. Only narrative. And whether you believe Scott Peterson is guilty or believe he is innocent, one forensic truth stands above all others. Science does not tell the same story that the verdict did. Not yet. Not completely. Maybe not ever. After 2 decades, 2 trials, 2 appeals, and 2 generations of public debate, we must confront a reality that neither side wants to accept. Not the prosecution, not Scott's supporters, not the public, not even the Innocence Project. The truth is, we still don't know what happened to Laci Peterson. Not completely, not definitively, not scientifically. And that uncertainty is far more frightening than any verdict. Because certainty is comforting. Certainty lets us sleep. Certainty gives tragedy structure. But uncertainty makes us look inward. Uncertainty forces us to ask hard questions. Uncertainty makes us confront what we missed. And in the Peterson case, the uncertainty is overwhelming. We still don't know when she died. The exact timeline, the backbone of the prosecution, is not proven. Because without a cause of death, without time of death evidence, without definitive pathology, everything becomes assumption, inference, estimation, belief. And belief is not proof. We still don't know where she died. The state says, in the house, but there is no physical proof. Not a drop, not a stain, not a mark, no sign of violence, no trace of cleanup. No forensic reconstruction, nothing. We still don't know how she died. There is no method, no wound, no trauma signature, no medical evidence to support strangulation. No evidence she drowned, no evidence of smothering. There is no physiological blueprint, none. We still don't know if she left the house alive. If even one sighting is accurate, Scott Peterson's timeline collapses instantly. And the entire theory becomes impossible. We still don't know if the bay was the crime scene. The bodies were found there. But no evidence connects Scott's boat to Laci's remains. No anchor, no rope, no tarp, no DNA, no trace. Only geography. And geography is not proof. We still don't know why critical evidence was never tested. That question should haunt every viewer. Because science is not emotional. Science is not subjective. Science is not interpretative. Science answers questions. Science doesn't fear uncertainty. Science confronts it. And yet, science was not allowed to speak fully in this case. Not then, not for 20 years, only now. The most uncomfortable possibility. It is possible that Scott Peterson is guilty. It is possible that the state got it right. It is possible that his behavior pointed toward truth. But it is also possible that he did not kill his wife, or that someone else was involved, or that another crime occurred, or that the story we accepted was not the truth, but the best version of a truth we desperately wanted. Because the country needed resolution, needed closure, needed a villain, needed order, even if that order was incomplete. The terrifying middle ground. There are 2 kinds of injustice: convicting the wrong man and failing to convict the right one. Either possibility here is horrifying, because if Scott Peterson is innocent, then Laci Peterson's killer walked free. for 22 years, and the baby she carried never got real justice. And that is a truth harder to accept than anything else in this case. The question we must end with, not, is Scott Peterson innocent, unpolished? Do we truly know what happened? Because justice demands certainty, and today, certainty does not exist. Not fully, not medically, not scientifically, not forensically, not conclusively, until DNA speaks. This case remains unresolved, incomplete, unfinished, and the truth remains buried somewhere between grief and evidence, between emotion and fact, and what we believe and what we can prove. 2 decades ago, the nation made up its mind. We believed we knew the guilty man. We believed the evidence was clear. We believed justice had prevailed. But now, as new questions surface, as new witnesses emerge, as DNA testing begins, we are forced to confront a difficult truth. This case isn't over. Not scientifically, not psychologically, not morally. Because justice is not a feeling. Justice is not a headline. Justice is not a story we repeat until it becomes familiar. Justice requires certainty, and certainty demands facts, cold facts, hard facts, evidence-based facts. And if there is even the smallest chance that the truth was buried beneath assumption, emotion, media pressure, or tunnel vision, then we must be willing to look again, not for Scott Peterson, but for Laci, for Connor, for their family, for justice. Because closure built on incomplete truth is not justice at all. The world now waits for DNA testing, for answers, for the one thing this case has never truly had, clarity. And until that clarity arrives, we stand in the middle, between outrage and uncertainty, between belief and doubt, between story and evidence, the only place more frightening than guilt. PS is not knowing. And tonight, as we end this documentary, we carry one question forward. What if the truth was never discovered? And what if we're only now beginning to uncover it? Thank you for watching. If you want more deep psychological breakdowns, more true crime investigations, more cases examined with brutal honesty and respect, make sure you subscribe, because this isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new chapter, and we'll be here to follow it together.